This is the Making Noise podcast.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's a little over a quarter of a year.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's like
Yeah.
3 months and however long.
Yeah.
And I like what you said about not just doing the challenge, but what the purpose is for doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to tack onto that as well is how heavily are you, how do I say that? How intense is your focus while you're doing that thing?
Mm-hmm.
You know, because it's one thing to sort of passively, like it's like an exercise challenge, you know, which I think is a pretty popular thing is
Mm-hmm.
to take on certain exercise challenges. And it's like, you could be doing the exercises, but are you doing them properly? Are you doing them in a way that triggers the muscles so that they're effectively being used? And
long enough.
What's that?
Are you doing them for long enough?
Exactly.
Yeah. So yes, there are days where I play for 5 minutes, but it's 5 minutes with intention to record a video that has to go on the internet, which means I have to be okay with it. Mm. It can't just be me messing around for 5 minutes. It does have to be a focused 5 minutes. And then there's some days where I practice for 3 hours because the piece is really hard and I can't get it recorded.
Right. Yeah.
But it's always active practicing. And so that is so much better than just kind of going, okay, well, I need to practice today. And then you play like some scales while watching YouTube videos.
Yeah.
Not to say that I haven't done that.
Yeah. We all do that. Don't worry. We all do.
I don't want to shame the scales in YouTube practice session, but sometimes you do want to play with intention.
Yeah, it has its place at you know, there's times for it. Yeah. That's that's funny. Yeah, with improvisation and you mentioned being okay with just putting it online and putting it out there. And I think that also that like translates into improvisation itself, where it's like being okay with what you just did.
Yeah.
How have you gotten to the point where you feel comfortable with that?
I honestly don't really know. I think it was just doing it. Like it was just practicing being uncomfortable. I was working with Splice. So Splice is an electroacoustic institute and festival that is based out of Kalamazoo, and the festival rotates locations. So the 2018 Institute had a theme of improvisation. And Dana Jessen, who's this incredible contemporary bassoonist, and Sam Pluta, who's a composer based at University of Chicago, were the guest artists. And they're both incredible improvisers. And they basically just threw us in a room. We're like, okay, you two, you have to do this thing where you can only play high and you can only play low and you have to play with each other. And so that I see that as a turning point of being told I had to do something and other people being uncomfortable around me, but still doing something and getting used to it being uncomfortable. And then when I came back, there's a trumpet player that went to Indiana with me who's based in Chicago, Matt Riggin, if you know him.
I don't think so.
Okay, but he's an incredible improviser, and because he does free jazz, he and I are very close to the border of jazz and classical. And so he was like, hey, do you want to do some improv shows? Like, I think it'd be really fun. Knowing what I do and what he does. And so we started doing some like duo improvs, which are safer and easier to do because you can, if you feel uncomfortable, you can hide behind someone. Like you can start hiding in their sound. And at some point I stopped hiding a little bit and started like leading him. And at some point I started also improvising myself more, because solo improv is definitely the hardest of the forms of improv. And at some point I found sounds that were comfortable and they were in my happy place, and I could go back to those if I felt uncomfortable rather than hiding behind someone else. So even though I was using my comfort zone, I was still able to lead and to push and to develop sound. And so I guess that's what happened is I found ways to make myself comfortable in my uncomfortableness because I could explore the instrument and I knew what where things sat in my instrument. And so I became more confident in trying things.
Wow, that there's so much in there that is so useful, I think, for especially a lot of classical performers, because they're so used to reading notated music, you know.
Yeah, and I'm not like, I'm definitely one of those. I actually went into my master's thinking I was going to be an orchestral musician.
Right.
I had always loved new music and had always worked with composers, but it wasn't until my master's where I really realized that this was what I wanted to do. So I had never improvised. I like literally wouldn't do it. And to the point where like if I had something in a contemporary piece or even in band where they have like a little aleatoric box, I would write it out.
Right,
Like,
right.
I would plan it out and I would have something written that I could play. And so it's been a very interesting discovery that I actually really do enjoy improvisation. And so there was someone who was asking me recently, like, how do I self-identify as like performer, composer, whatever it is? And I was like, I think I'm a performer improviser now. I think I can say that. Whereas I used to always just say I was a performer.
That's it's an interesting spot to sort of be in a way. I mean, because like especially in new music, you know, there's such a demand on the amount of things that you need to be doing at one given moment. You know, it's like play this note with this rhythm and this amount of air present, and then bend the flute as you do that. You know, like, and I imagine like that's sort of where improvisation actually can translate into improvisation pretty well.
Yeah.
Because now you're actually, in my mind at least, and please like correct me on this, but like I feel like it's providing you a lot more tools to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've also, I think I talked about this in a video recently, but I kind of make improvs into etudes. So if I'm struggling with something or like I really want to focus on pitch bending or multiphonics or something, instead of finding an exercise, because those don't really exist, especially with the contemporary sounds, I'll start improvising and really focus on that. And if it's good and I like it, I'll post it and fine. And if it's not, if it just sounds like an etude, then cool. But it flexes two muscles and it works in different bunch of different ways and is much more engaging to me than like a technical etude.
That's great. Yeah. Well, this is fantastic. I mean, it's funny because like, I mean, as we were corresponding via email, you know, I was mentioning how like with these podcasts and stuff, like I don't really have a general plan as to what everything we're going to talk about, but there are some things that I think would be interesting. And what I love is like so far we've talked about things that are applicable for both composers and performers.
Yeah, and I think that like I don't write a ton. I do write a little bit of flute music, but it's mostly for myself and like very specific to what I do. But I have spent so much time around composers and I do understand the mindset and like the stress that you guys have, that I try to, as I've said before, bridge the gap of like, we are all scared and stressed and worried about stuff, and I'll have very like esoteric careers to look forward to. And if we can work together rather than against each other, it works better. It's more fun.